Okay, so my name is Emilie Sherio. I'm an internal strategy consultant at GitLab. Today is October 10th, 2019. Taylor, you want to introduce yourself?
I am Taylor Murphy, staff data engineer on the data team here at GitLab.
Cool. So the goal for this conversation today is to talk a little bit about DataOps. There's a lot of conversations out there around what DataOps is, and I'd love to get a sense of, like, what do you think it is? What do you think it isn't? What is, like, maybe being put under this umbrella that isn't relevant? And then how do you use GitLab for DataOps?
Yeah. So I recently gave a talk about this and was doing some sleuthing on Wikipedia and all these pages. And in general, I think DataOps is really about driving value. It's driving value to a customer, decreasing cycle time on analytics, and implementing like processes and methodologies, kind of with that guiding principle in mind. I looked at like what is DevOps before I kind of did like what is DataOps. And DevOps like doesn't have a strong definition in and of itself, even though I think we're like kind of pushing a good definition. But the goal is, basically faster results with less things breaking while maintaining security, and keeping your customers happy. And so it's to me, it's about placing that philosophy onto the data side of the house, whether it's internal, you have internal facing customers or external facing customers. What do you think of that definition?
Yeah, so I'm just writing this down as you talk because I like to write notes. But I'm wondering, so the DevOps definition you've laid out with these 4 parts: faster results, less things breaking, security, and keeping customers happy. Like, is there a reason that definition can apply?
No, I think it's absolutely applicable. The domain of data is slightly different, I think.
So let's dig into that piece then, right? Like, if the principles or the pillars are the same, what are the differences between DevOps and DataOps?
I think a lot of it, one, is managing state, essentially. So DevOps does interact with data. There's clearly a database backing most applications.
Mm-hmm.
But the volumes that we're talking about are generally reasonable, and the application can be developed without too much of a sense of the underlying data. Whereas DataOps is all about the data. It's all about the current, past, like future state of the data. The volumes can be tremendous. And it's just like a different level of complexity and challenge, I think. That's where I kind of see the dividing line a bit.
I would think that, so whereas in DevOps, you're developing an application, I would also say that while you're in DataOps, you're developing codes and models and analyses and all these things, but like the deliverable isn't necessarily that, it's the insight. That's
fair. Yeah, it in the narrow sense, it's like business intelligence. It's delivering a dashboard.
Yeah.
But there is a component of it that is taking that dashboard and some additional data and applying additional insight, like in different methodologies or whatever, your expertise to tease out information. So there's a bit of art to it, and maybe that's not encapsulated in any technical piece. It's just like staring at the data and coming up with reasonable hypotheses. I wonder, do you think there's like go ahead.
Is that part of DataOps? Where's the line?
It can be. I think if it feeds, most likely it will be, because it's going to feed back into the cycle somewhere. Mm-hmm. I would think. So you're going to work on some data, present some results, and then that should lead you to, well, what if, or, how about we do this, which then kind of pulls you back into that cycle for another round of iteration.
Almost like the insight leads to that plan stage.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
Plan, create, verify. Yeah. So I'm sorry. I'm just looking at the figure 8. Yeah.
Which one? So looking at that figure 8, which I think it's like there are some stages that are more obviously suited to draw parallels, right? Plan, create, verify are like kind of, I would say, the first, the easiest stages to adopt, right?
Yeah.
Are there any stages that you think aren't super relevant? Not that they're maybe not being used, but just like don't apply.
So I'm looking at, so the ones you really didn't mention: package, release, configure, monitor. Package and release is a little different, but I can come up with some parallels where there's like, maybe you are on a data team or part of a larger organization that is responsible for generating some sort of data output, managing that. Like, we don't do that currently, I think, but you can say like, hey, we're responsible for putting out a daily data dump of this data set. How do you package that? How do you version it? How do you make it available to people? Like, I think that's absolutely a concern. Just with the extra concern of, if this data set is 600, gigabytes, how do you manage that? Configure and monitor. I'm thinking more. I think configure is, as I understand it, is applicable because it's like you have to configure your data environment around like permissioning, size. Like, I do that in Snowflake all the time, worrying about warehouse sizes and who has access to what. So this is a very roundabout. I'm talking myself into like, no, I think they're all very related.
I'm thinking about package. I would say that the Snowplow package or Snowflake package that we have, the Snowflake spend package, like that is a DBT package that we have to release as if it were software, right? Like, it has a cadence and an iteration. That makes sense to me.
Backwards compatibility.
Yeah. What about configure and okay, so package, release, configure. What about monitor?
Yeah, monitor is something I don't have a ton of experience with in the data world, and we're actually talking about that actively. So like, Snowflake has built-in monitoring of all queries, but we want to be alerted if somebody is querying some sensitive data.
Yeah.
There's monitoring of the orchestration piece. Like, absolutely, you need to. That's kind of tied in with verify, but monitor is more about like, hey, you've set up this whole data pipeline. Is it working? Is it failing? What do you do when a job fails? How do you pick things back up? And so we've got Airflow for that, but it's not super tied in well to the rest of the stack. So it's monitoring for, hey, are the pipelines running? Hey, is anybody kind of doing things they shouldn't be doing? And then also too, there's like a data quality monitoring piece, I would argue, as well. So like, you've got the orchestration, but then within that there are data quality measures that have to happen in between. Is that kind of tied in, end to end?
Yeah. I would make the case too, like secure. Hearing you talk about this, secure and defend are probably just as important, if not more important, in your data development, because your database has such sensitive data, and something that whether it's a gem or a package that's compromised, you risk leaking access to not just like your application, but to database with potentially really sensitive data, depending on your org.
I mean, what else is secure and defending? What are you securing and defending against in a regular application? It's access to the data.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, that's at the end of the day, it's like you want to protect your customer user application data. The code can only do so much, and I think we live that by like our entire analytics stack is open source, because it's the proprietary valuable information isn't that, it's the actual data behind the scenes.
Yeah. So if teams wanted to implement DataOps, right? Like, they hear this buzzword, they're like, faster cycle times, yes, please. Where should they start?
Use DBT. I mean, that was kind of the, so okay, so when I gave this talk on DataOps,
Yeah.
I really approached it from a technical perspective. I did not approach it necessarily from a cultural perspective, or an organizational perspective. So from a technical perspective, I think it's about starting with version control, and then you can build things up from there. If you have SQL scripts that you're running manually that are in random files, like put that into some sort of version control, so you can understand the history and have that control over it. And then from there, you can build into automated jobs, separate environments, and kind of this whole stack, and building into testing, which is kind of where DBT comes in. So that's one area to start if you are focused on kind of like the technical thing. I think there's a higher level conversation to be had about data ops within the organization. What does that actually look like? And I think that has to be driven at a, at an IC level, but like at the senior manager, director, C-suite level. Like I think GitLab is a really cool place because we kind of have that DevOps. We do have that DevOps culture built in, but you've also, on the data side, you've got executives who like intuitively understand the value of data and a true data-driven culture and what it takes to get there and what that really means. And so honestly, like the starting point for every organization is going to be different. I think it starts with a lot of conversations with somebody who cares a lot about it and knows the end state that they want to get to, and to find out where different members of your organization are. Because if your CEO doesn't believe in kind of what a strong data team can do,
Yeah.
That's going to be really hard.
So what can strong data teams do?
Whew, a lot. Really good data teams. So let's maybe separate a little bit between like business intelligence versus like product intelligence. So like strong business intelligence, you can have an excellent understanding of what the organization is doing, because a lot of these SaaS tools that we use, if you think about it, it's all about kind of monitoring and surveillance of different parts of the organization. So Greenhouse helps, the people group manage candidates and recruits and things like that. NetSuite is for all the finance stuff. And so the data team is good at integrating all of that data together to get a high level and detailed level view across the organization, not just within individual slices. It's really that data integration piece that data teams should be really good at. So that's on like the business intelligence side. I think on the product intelligence side is being able to understand what the customer pain points are and figure out and test better paths to making the product better. So like the data that's generated from a product is like the evolutionary driver of growth and change in the product. And if you don't have that insight, it's all like random mutations. Whereas if you understand what's happening, you can make directed changes intelligently, I think. Intelligent design versus evolution, random evolution.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Do you know, here, I'm going to send you this link real fast. I know we've talked about this article before, so it's not going to come as a surprise. This is that data science hierarchy of needs chart. And the foundation here is collect. When I think about data ops, as I see it in my head, move and store, explore and transform, and aggregate and label, and probably even like learn and optimize and up. Like that part, I see how it fits into data ops well. I guess the question I'd pose is, does that collect stage figure into this data ops life cycle, or is it outside of it?
I think it should be a part of it. To me, this data science hierarchy of needs chart is a small slice of kind of data management, and it's with a specific target in mind of implementing predictive modeling kind of at the peak.
Yeah.
Because what you don't have in here are any of the connections between kind of the organization and do they really talk about like, they don't talk about like documentation. So kind of all the people things. This is a very technical thing. So I would say yes, like collecting the data is part of it, because I think, you know, if I kind of map this onto what GitLab has currently, you know, we use third-party SaaS tools to collect Salesforce and Zora and Zendesk data. Part of the, like, I would argue, part of the DataOps kind of iteration is that the feedback mechanism that then says, hey, we've got testing and monitoring in place to help you improve data quality upstream, to improve the collection, which then improves kind of the whole downstream part of it. That's the nice thing about a term like DataOps is it can kind of be whatever you want it to be. So I can make an argument either way, but I tend to think that most of people in an organization are generating a lot of data, and if you want insight into that, it becomes part of this DataOps philosophy and how you think about how that data is generated, managed, you know, stored, analyzed, and reviewed. And if you're not generating data in your job, like, wonder what you're doing.
Not working.
Because even people who probably don't think about that, like salespeople, are absolutely generating a ton of data.
You clock in and out, right? It's not even those of us who sit at our computers all day. Like, if you clock in and out at any job in the world, right, that's generating data.
Yeah.
So I totally see that. You and I have talked about this a little bit, that I have this like 3-tiered framework for analyses in my head, and I've recently renamed it with the help of a dear friend, Claire, to reporting, insights, predictions.
Okay.
And so I'm curious, like, there are lots of orgs I know for a fact who don't implement anything like version control or testing, that are doing reporting. The question I'd pose is, can you move into insights without DataOps? Or will you always be stuck in these like one-off SQL scripts that generate a chart?
I think you can move up the ladder, so you can get to insights and prediction, just not in a repeatable fashion. Like, yeah, you can absolutely throw a data scientist at a problem and they're going to generate something and it could be useful. But it's then when you want to go back, tweak some parameters, run it again 6 months down the line, can you do that? That's where I think so by maybe part of updating this definition is like, it's the repeatability of your analyses of your work. And some of it clearly doesn't need to be repeated, but of the things that are, and there's certainly components of like these fancy predictive things that we would want to reuse.
Yeah. Well, and even if it doesn't need to be repeated, that doesn't mean it doesn't need repeatability.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you, how do you differentiate between repeatability and scalability?
Scalability, like, can you be a little bit more specific on scalability? Like, is it scalability with data or the organization, or? So
I think of scalability first in like a people function way. Like, if your work is repeatable, you need less people to do the work that needs to get done. Whereas if you're running ad hoc work all the time, then you need more people to do the same amount of work. And I would make the case that scalability of people and scalability of, like, can your code handle terabytes of data is a different, like, you can solve for one without solving for the other.
Yeah, no, well, you certainly can. Because I think, like, our snowplow implementation is a great example where it was very scalable for multiple analysts to collaborate on the code because we're using dbt. It reached a data volume where it was not scalable and something had to be done. And so we partitioned the data.
Yeah.
So that's a technical solution. Whereas the other scalable piece with people is like a technical solution that enables more people to collaborate or to that work to go out to more people. But I think back to your question then about repeatability versus scalability, they're very related, but I don't think you can't have scalability without any sort of repeatability necessarily, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Because it's at that point, everything's going to be, if you can't repeat what you're doing in any sort of sane manner, you're not going to be, it's not going to scale, because scaling really means repeating what you're doing at larger volumes.
Yeah. And in terms of scaling people, it means being able to do new things, which if you're not doing things in a repeatable way, you're always redoing them, you're never going to create space for people to work on new things.
Yeah. That's like scaling your ambitions, basically.
Yeah. Cool. Any other thoughts you want to mention?
Well, do you want to talk about like how we're doing this at GitLab, or how?
Oh yeah, sure.
So do you think the question should be focused around like where do you see GitLab the product?
No.
Fitting in for DataOps?
Yes. Yeah. Like if someone says, okay, I use GitLab in my work. My software team, I'm a startup of one. My software team is using GitLab. I know my data team should be using DataOps. Like, how do we do that with GitLab?
Maybe use Meltano if it makes sense for you. I think, but let's say like maybe Meltano isn't the right use case, because maybe you do have like orchestration or whatever in place.
Well, and I'm of the opinion that like Meltano can go on top of like a version control and CI system. Like Meltano's not going to ship with version control.
Right, and that's actually a distinction. Like I want to talk with Danielle more about is like how do you see these two working together? Is it going to be an integrated product? Because I don't want to have, and I've said this from the beginning, I want to use both GitLab and Meltano. Yeah. I love all the parts, like the plan, create, manage, all that fun stuff. So if you don't, if like Meltano, the product isn't the right fit and you kind of have your own tools, I still do think it's like, I'm very biased obviously, but like GitLab, the product is like, okay, start centering your work like as an analyst or an engineer around issues, and start implementing version control, and start thinking like, I know when you came on, like we were thinking like, how can we route everything through a merge request? Because it's like the ultimate change control. Here's the change I want to make. Here's the current state, and let's merge that and make that happen. And like I want that in our BI tool. But no tool, as far as I know, like enables that in the BI space. But you can do it for the transformation and the data loading space. So there's pieces and components there. But even small things, just like throwing it in a repo and like centering that place where the collaboration happens and like driving that data culture. It's about like where is the single source of truth for everything. I'd almost go so far as to say like, I've said this before, like if your company doesn't have like a handbook for a single source of truth for things, for forcing conversations on what a KPI is or how you do things, like it's going to be a struggle for me to work anywhere else that doesn't have a handbook, because it has its own problems, but it like has been it just works.
Yeah. Yeah. So who in a company needs to know version control? Like I know we're a unique case here at GitLab. Like we have to be able to recognize that. But I guess the question I'd push on is like, are we the future here now, or are we genuinely pushing people who would never use version control to use version control?
I think everybody needs to understand the high-level concepts of version control. I would not expect everyone to understand the underlying data structure of Git and how it's a DAG and that you can do all these crazy. I don't even understand. Like every time I do anything besides, basic stuff in Git, I have to go look it up. But it's such a powerful tool and a great way of making those changes in a controlled manner that you want people thinking about that. Like you want people thinking about that history and that state of things. Like, are we going to lose information if we do something with this? I don't think everything necessarily needs to be version controlled. Like, some things do, I think, have a right to be forgotten. Like, and that's going with the whole GDPR thing and everything. But like, so version control at the high level, not the technical level, I think it has power for everybody, honestly.
Okay, so we're coming up on the end of time here. What I would love to end with, you can take a minute to think about this, but what is the Taylor Murphy 8-step plan to implementing DataOps at your org? Like,
can you define a little bit more specific on your org, or is this
your data?
general?
Yeah, general. Think about where the team was when I started, right? Like there. Come in, how do you implement DataOps?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things. One I would think is like, take a step back and think about what you're trying to do with your data team and understand kind of the charter and what's the state that you kind of want to get to, or like the next kind of incremental level with your data team. The second part is like realizing you're going to have to put some investment into that. It's either going to be some money or some people investment. But if you want to get your data out of Salesforce, you can either pay somebody to write a custom extractor, or you can pay Stitch or Fivetran. You're going to need a data warehouse. You can start simply. You can start with Postgres, and you can start with a managed service. But there's going to be a little bit of an upfront investment to do it even halfway decently, I'd say. And then the second thing, or the third, whatever number we're on, is to start thinking about the processes that you are accidentally or by default kind of defining in the work that you do. If your work is generating some dashboards, like you're leaving behind artifacts, you're creating a process. Think a lot about how that process works, where you can document it. Even if it's internal or like just for you, have a handbook, get into that habit. I think it's about being operationally mature. I say that to a lot of people. It's like GitLab is very operationally mature because we have to be, because we're all remote. We have our handbook. And then from kind of once you have that, it's then start thinking about, how can I do things in the context of a merge request? How can I control the change on this better? Whether that's, hey, I needed to be taking snapshots with dbt, or I need to put this into version control to make merge requests. And then on like the technical side, I think things kind of fall out from there. You start looking into like automated jobs, separate environments, automated testing, kind of built-in documentation, which GitLab can help with that, and dbt can help with that. But then it's also scaling out the operational and data-driven side of the organization with good documentation, making sure everyone can contribute, that it's clear where things are, as to the best of your ability, that you have communicated what's the queue, how do you get things done with the data team? Do I make an issue? Do I do what? I think that's good on the path, and I think there's a lot of like holes and caveats for different, depending on your organization. But I think that strategy also works for like implementing data-driven features as well. Was that an okay answer?
Yeah, it was great. So, because what I want to highlight there, just from what I've heard, is that there are 3 steps before you even get to the code.
Yeah, like arguably, if I were to go into an organization as a single data person, like you hire somebody to bring the data team. You don't bring in the technology necessarily to get started. And so that person, what are they going to do? Like, yeah, they can buy some technical things, but it is like a cultural shift as well. And you have to get that buy-in for I know how much we spend as a data team, and we work to make it cheaper, but like there is some initial investment for sure, especially in today's closed source world of data warehouses and things.
Cool. Any last thoughts? Anything you want to mention?
No, I think we covered a lot. I think there's a lot of avenues to kind of pull it apart. I'm just one person. We're just two people with two perspectives. So
Yeah. Cool. Thanks.